I might hold the world record for the fastest lawsuit ever tossed out of court. And I'm not talking about some summary judgment after weeks of motions. I mean a case that was alive one moment and legally dead the next, dismissed with prejudice just 3 minutes after it began. The HOA that sued me spent over $20,000 on their attorney. All that money for him to stand there, go pale as chalk, and watch his entire case collapse into dust, and possibly criminal charges. How did I pull it off? It helps when you're a lawyer, and the people suing you have built their entire house of cards on lies, forged documents, and pure audacity. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because you're not going to believe the level of suburban warfare I had to endure just to live peacefully in my own home. It all started when my wife and I bought what we thought was our dream house. We'd spent years in a cramped downtown condo, saving every cent. I had just made partner at my law firm, specializing in corporate governance, a fancy way of saying I clean up the messes made by incompetent executives. It's a job that requires surgical attention to detail and zero tolerance for nonsense. Both traits would soon become my weapons of war. The new house was in a recently developed area at the edge of town. 4 bedrooms, a big backyard for the dog we planned to get, and old oak trees lining the property. But the single most beautiful feature, the one that made me sign the contract with a flourish, was a line buried in the title documents. This property is not subject to any homeowners association covenants or restrictions. To me, those were the most poetic words in the English language. The development had been built in 2 phases. Phase 1, Crestwood Meadows, was a sprawling collection of about 200 homes with a community pool, tennis courts, and an HOA that ruled with an iron grip. Phase 2, where we bought our house, was an additional 30 lots carved from an adjacent parcel a year later. It was marketed as the Enclave at Crestwood, a name designed to borrow the prestige of the first phase without inheriting its shackles. The dividing line was clear on every county plat map. A small creek and a row of ancient-looking stone markers. Crestwood Meadows was east of the creek. The Enclave was west. We were on the west side. It was unambiguous. It was legally recorded. It was, I thought, settled history. We moved in on a sunny Saturday. Friends helped. The first time we unlocked our front door was pure euphoria. In the chaos of unloading boxes, we didn't notice the white Range Rover that parked across the street, nor the woman who stood outside it for 10 full minutes, arms crossed, silently watching us. She had a face like a judgmental hawk. Her blonde hair was pulled into a ponytail so tight it looked painful. Her outfit screamed weaponized leisure: white tennis skirt, pastel pink polo, and sneakers so clean they practically glowed. Eventually, she marched across the street with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed and stopped at the edge of our driveway. I was halfway wrangling a box labeled "Kitchen, Fragile," out of the U-Haul when she spoke. "Excuse me," she said, her voice laced with disdain, as if I were already a disappointment. I set the box down and wiped sweat from my brow. "Hi there," I said with a smile. "We're the new owners. I'm Mark." She didn't smile back. "I'm Brenda," she announced like it was a name I should already know. "President of the Crestwood Meadows Homeowners Association." She said president, the way someone might say ambassador, or supreme commander. Then she shoved a thick, professionally bound folder into my hands. "This is your welcome packet. It includes the community bylaws, the architectural modification form, your due schedule, and your first month's invoice. Prorated. Plus the move-in fee." I glanced between the folder and her icy stare. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said carefully. "We're not in the HOA. Our property is in the Enclave, the second phase." Brenda let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's a common mistake among new residents who don't read their paperwork thoroughly. The Enclave is just a marketing name. All of this," she said, sweeping her arm across the neighborhood like a monarch claiming land, "is Crestwood Meadows. You're west of the main boulevard. You're in the HOA. Everyone knows that." "With all due respect, Brenda," I said, the lawyer in me fully awake, "I've read the paperwork. Thoroughly. The deed, the title report, the plat map, they all make it very clear. This lot is not in the HOA. The creek is the boundary." She waved her hand dismissively, a diamond on her finger catching the light. Clerical errors. The developer's lawyers were sloppy. We're getting it corrected. In the meantime, you're a member. Then her eyes flicked past me toward the U-Haul. And you already have your first violation. Commercial vehicles can't be parked on the street for more than 2 hours. It's been 3. That's a $50 fine. I'll waive it this time as a courtesy. Don't let it happen again. I was stunned. She was fining me for moving into my own house. Brenda, I said, my tone colder now, I'm not part of your HO. You have no authority here. You can't fine me. You can't enforce your rules on me. Her lips drew tight. You'll find that we can, she said, voice dripping with smug confidence. You lawyers love loopholes. But we have lawyers too. Very good ones. You'll be receiving a demand letter soon. In the meantime, your dues payment is due by the end of the month. She turned without another word and strode back to her Range Rover, leaving me standing in my driveway with a folder full of nonsense and a rising storm in my chest. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a land grab. She wasn't correcting a mistake. She was trying to annex my property into her petty fiefdom. As she drove away, I looked down at the welcome packet. The cover was embossed in elegant gold letters. I had a feeling Brenda was doing neither. I went inside, placed the folder on the counter, and told my wife, I think I just met the queen of the suburbs. And I think she wants to go to war. My wife, who knows me too well, just sighed and said, well then. God help Brenda. Little did Brenda know she hadn't just picked a fight. She had handed a litigator a case file pro bono, and I was about to begin my discovery phase. The letters started arriving within a week. They were official-looking, printed on expensive letterhead bearing the Crestwood Meadows HOA logo and signed by Brenda in a florid self-important script. The first was a formal demand for the prorated dues and the move-in fee now marked as past due with a late penalty added. The second was a warning citation for the moving truck stating that my so-called courtesy waiver was contingent on immediate payment of dues. It was a textbook example of bureaucratic intimidation designed to overwhelm someone into paying just to make it stop. But I wasn't someone. I was a litigator. I read legal threats the way a surgeon reads x-rays. These were hollow. They cited bylaws that didn't apply to me and threatened actions with no legal ground to stand on. I filed them neatly in a folder I labeled Suburban Warfare. My first step was simple due diligence. I didn't rely on the closing documents. I went straight to the county recorder's office and pulled the original filed and stamped plat maps for Crestwood Meadows Phase 1 and the enclave at Crestwood Phase 2. Doris, the clerk behind the counter, immediately caught on. With a knowing sigh, she asked if I was having trouble. I just nodded. The maps were unmistakable. A thick, bold line separated the two developments. Our lot in Phase 2 was clearly labeled not subject to HOA covenants of Phase 1. I paid for certified copies. This was my foundation. Next, I went to the Secretary of State's website and pulled the corporate filings for the Crestwood Meadows Homeowners Association. I wanted the articles of incorporation, the registered agent, the full list of officers. Brenda was of course listed as president. Her husband Gary, a timid-looking accountant, was the treasurer. 2 other names I didn't recognize rounded out the board. Then I drove to the address listed for their registered agent. It wasn't a law firm. It was a UPS store. Brenda had listed a mailbox as the legal contact address for the HOA. A minor but clear violation of state corporate law. It told me everything. Brenda was running the show with little to no legal oversight. It was sloppy and it was useful. Then came a letter from a real law firm. Standard boilerplate. It stated I was a member of the HOA in good standing except for my delinquent balance, which now included several $100s in dues and fines. The list of violations was absurd. My grass was allegedly too long. My builder-installed front door was an unapproved shade of burgundy. My recycling bin had been visible from the street for 3 hours on trash day. The lawyer, who I'll call Mr. Snide, was clearly relying on information Brenda had spoon-fed him. He hadn't spent 5 minutes with a plat map. He was just cashing a retainer and sending out form letters. I drafted a professional response. I attached certified copies of the county plats and quoted the relevant deed language. I laid out in clear legal terms that their jurisdiction did not include my property. I warned that any further harassment would result in legal action for damages. I sent it certified mail. Return receipt requested. That, I thought, would be the end of it. No competent attorney, when presented with irrefutable government documents proving their client's claims are false, would proceed. Any reasonable lawyer would call their client, explain the situation, and advise her to back down. Mr. Snide, it turned out, was not reasonable. Or maybe Brenda's persuasion or her checkbook was more compelling than common sense. His reply arrived a week later and it was shocking. My client, he wrote, disputes the validity of your so-called evidence. We are in possession of a superseding document. A legally executed amendment that annexes Phase 2 into the Crestwood Meadows HOA. A copy is attached. If your balance is not paid within 10 business days, we will place a lien on your property. My blood ran cold. An amendment? Could it be? Had the developer quietly filed something that overrode the maps and deed? If it was valid, my entire position was in jeopardy. I opened the envelope. The attachment was a 2-page document titled Third Amendment to the Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions for Crestwood Meadows. It looked official. It had signature lines, a notary block, and legal language. It claimed that 6 months before my purchase, the developer and the HOA had agreed to merge the two phases under single governance. If it was legitimate, I was in serious trouble. If it was fake, I had them dead to rights. But then I started to actually read it. Years of training in corporate governance and identifying procedural fraud kicked in. The red flags weren't subtle. They screamed. The developer's signature was nothing more than a vague swirl above the typed name of a company that no longer existed. I confirmed the dissolution date in minutes. A defunct company cannot sign legal documents. The notary stamp was next. It was from a state across the country, and the name was smeared just enough to raise suspicion. I checked that state's notary registry. No such person existed. Strike two. Then came the fatal mistake. The amendment referenced specific paragraphs from the original HOA covenants, but the citations were wrong. Sloppy. It read like a student faking a book report. And then came the nail in the coffin. The date. It was over a year after the county had officially recorded the Phase 2 plat map that declared the enclave HOA free. For this amendment to have any legal weight, it would have needed to be filed with the county. It wasn't. That's not a technicality. That's the law. I spent the next hour cross-referencing everything. I called a contact at the title insurance company who had handled my closing. I asked him to run a deep search for any liens, amendments, or recorded documents tying my property to the Crestwood Meadows HOA. He called back 2 hours later. Mark, he said, you're clean. There's nothing. I pulled the entire chain of title back to the original land grant in the 1800s. That lot has never been touched by the HOA. Whatever they're waving at you, it doesn't exist legally. It's a ghost. No, it was worse than that. This wasn't just baseless. It was a forged legal instrument. Brenda hadn't overreached. She had crossed into criminal territory. She and her attorney weren't just misinformed. They were attempting to extort money using fabricated documentation. That changed everything. Defense was no longer enough. Brenda wasn't an overzealous HOA president. She was a predator hiding behind an organization to run her own personal racket. I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to expose her. I saved the forgery under the file name Exhibit A and began drafting a new kind of letter. One not meant to deflect, but to destroy. With the forged amendment in hand, I shifted to offense. Brenda's fatal mistake wasn't just creating a fraudulent document. It was putting it in writing and handing it to a lawyer. She had delivered her own weapon straight into my hands. Still, I knew pointing out the forgery might not be enough. These things can turn into a messy word-against-word slog. I needed more. I needed to understand the system that allowed Brenda to thrive. And the law had given me just the right tools. Under the state's Common Interest Community Act, any member of an HOA has the right to inspect the association's records. All of them. Financials, minutes, contracts, rosters. Of course, technically I wasn't a member. But Brenda and her lawyer had insisted I was. That meant I had every legal right to see the books. Their own claim boxed them in. I drafted a formal request citing the statute and sent it to both Brenda and her lawyer. I asked for the past 5 years of financial audits, all bank statements, meeting minutes, a full roster of homeowners and every contract with service providers. I knew she wouldn't comply. The refusal would become evidence. Another violation stacked atop the pile. While I waited for the response I knew wouldn't come, I did what any good investigator does. I walked the ground. Crestwood Meadows looked pristine on the surface. Lawns shaved to regulation length. Houses painted in government-issue shades of beige. Every tree pruned. Every hedge squared. But then the cracks started to show. The playground equipment was rusted. The tennis court net sagged. The community pool had chipped tiles along the waterline. Not massive issues, but signs. Signs that the money wasn't going where it should. I struck up a conversation with a man washing his car. I introduced myself as a new homeowner from the enclave next door. His eyes flicked up and down the street before he spoke. "Welcome," he said. "Just keep your head down." I asked what he meant. "Brenda," he said in a low voice. "She runs this place like a dictatorship. Fines for everything. Put your trash can out too early? $50. Your kid leaves a toy in the driveway? $75. Most people just pay. It's not worth the fight." That was the clue I needed. A reign of fear only works when people feel alone. But if there's discontent, there's a crack in the wall. Later that week, I found an older gentleman tending his flower bed. He had the calm presence of someone who used to command respect. I introduced myself again. "Mark," I said. "From the news section." He stood and extended a dirt-covered hand. "Arthur," he said. "Good to see some new blood, even if you're on the frontier." I laughed and mentioned my recent welcome from Brenda. His smile vanished. "Let me guess. She told you you're part of the HOA and owe her money." I nodded. "Happens every time someone moves into the enclave. Most people just tell her to pound sand and she backs off. You must have struck a nerve." I took a chance. "Arthur, I used to sit on a condo board years ago. Just curious, how's this one run? Are the finances healthy?" Arthur studied me. He saw something he liked. "Healthy," he said, "is a good question. One we're not allowed to ask anymore." He told me he had served on the initial board when the developer handed it over. Back then, things were transparent. Open meetings. Published budgets. Then Brenda was elected president. Her husband Gary, an accountant, became treasurer. She fired the management company, said she'd run it herself to save money. Since then it's been a black box. No access to numbers. No oversight. Dues go up every year, but the place starts to look like it's falling apart. Elections are rigged. She controls the proxies. The whole thing is a formality. He gestured toward the cracked tennis courts. "We pay more but we see less." This was gold. Arthur had history. He had context. He was my inside man. I told him I was a lawyer and that I was investigating Brenda's claim. He just nodded. "You do what you have to," he said. "Just watch your back. She doesn't like being challenged." Neither do I. A spark lit behind Arthur's eyes. "A lawyer, you say? It's about time someone with teeth stood up to her." He leaned in and lowered his voice. He told me about Pristine Lawns LLC, a landscaping company awarded an exclusive no-bid contract right after Brenda took control. Their rates were nearly twice the market average. Then he mentioned the annual community gala, a black tie affair costing nearly $50,000 a year, attended mostly by Brenda's inner circle. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. Right on cue, Mr. Snide responded to my request for records. His reply was dismissive. "My client does not recognize your standing to request such sensitive financial information. Your request is denied. Please be advised that a lien will be filed against your property if your account is not settled." Perfect. They had just committed a clear violation of state law, in writing. Then Brenda made her boldest move. Her gravest error. She sued me. A process server handed me the notice. Crestwood Meadows HOA v. Mark, District Court. They were demanding $575 in dues and fines, plus attorney's fees. It was pure arrogance. Brenda believed I would back down. That I would panic under legal pressure. What she failed to understand was that she had just stepped into my world. She had taken our petty neighborhood standoff and escalated it to the one place where I had an overwhelming advantage: a courtroom. She thought she had me trapped. In truth, she had just handed me a loaded weapon and begged me to use it. The lawsuit changed everything. It triggered discovery, the powerful legal process that turns questions into demands and silence into contempt. I filed my formal response denying every claim. Alongside it, I filed a counterclaim for harassment, attempted fraud, and abuse of process. I followed that with my first set of interrogatories and requests for production. Every document, every contract, every financial record. And most importantly, anything and everything connected to the so-called Third Amendment. Brenda was out of places to hide. She could no longer ignore me or posture behind vague threats. The law was now on my side and the clock was ticking. They fought back, of course. Brenda and Snide filed motions to quash, claiming my requests were overbroad and harassing. I responded with precision, laying out to the judge exactly why each document was relevant. Judge Miller, a sharp, no-nonsense jurist, saw right through their smokescreen. During the hearing, she peered over her glasses at Mr. Snide. "Counselor, your client initiated this lawsuit over a $575 claim. The defendant has raised credible questions about your client's authority. These documents are clearly relevant. You will produce them. All of them. Within 30 days. It was a total victory. When the deadline came, I received a large box at my office. It was a jumbled mess. Thousands of pages with no order or index. A classic document dump, meant to confuse and overwhelm. But I had spent years navigating worse. To me it was a trove. For 2 weekends, I locked myself in my home office, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of purpose. I dug in with highlighters and sticky notes, methodically reconstructing the truth behind Crestwood Meadows. The financials were worse than even Arthur had suspected. No audits. Just sloppy profit and loss statements prepared by Brenda's husband, Gary. They were riddled with discrepancies. I found the pristine lawns contract. 10 years, no termination clause, signed days after Brenda took office. A quick search confirmed what Arthur had hinted. Pristine Lawns LLC was registered to Brenda's brother-in-law. Then I saw a recurring charge, $5,000 per month for HOA management services. The payee? B Management Solutions. A shell company registered under Brenda's maiden name. She was paying herself $60,000 a year to manage the HOA, on top of her role as president. It wasn't just unethical. It was embezzlement. The meeting minutes painted an equally damning picture. Early records were detailed, transparent. Votes recorded, discussions noted. After Brenda's election, the notes became vague. Motions passed without votes. Contracts approved without listed attendees. Many of the documents appeared retyped, the signatures suspiciously identical. One special session showed only Brenda and her husband present. It was during that meeting they approved the multi-year, overpriced landscaping contract. The bylaws clearly required a full board vote for such expenditures. But the true bombshell lay buried deep in a folder marked Amendment Correspondence. It was an email thread between Brenda and Snide. Brenda wrote, "We need something stronger to make this guy in the enclave pay up. He's a lawyer and is questioning my authority." Snide's reply was terse. "The plat maps are a problem. To legally include his property would require a full vote and the owner's consent. It would be expensive and slow." Then came Brenda's chilling response. "Forget that. Can't you just draft something that looks official? An amendment or something. Just backdate it. He'll never know the difference. No one reads this stuff anyway." Snide's reply was a masterpiece of cowardice. "Brenda, I cannot and will not create a fraudulent document. That would be illegal. However, if you were to provide me with a signed and notarized amendment, I could act on it as a representation from my client." He washed his hands while giving her the road map. And sure enough, in the next email, Brenda attached the forgery. The file name? O_legal_thingy_draft v3.docs. She hadn't even bothered to rename the file. And Snide had never questioned it that he had taken the fraudulent document, one he all but told her to create, and used it to threaten me legally, then built a lawsuit around it. That made him complicit. At best, it was willful blindness. At worst, he was an accessory to fraud. I now had everything. The official evidence proving I wasn't in the HOA. The forged amendment they were using to pretend I was. The emails showing they knew it was fake. This wasn't just a case for dismissal. It was a textbook example of malicious prosecution. But I wasn't stopping at clearing my name. Brenda had deceived and exploited an entire neighborhood of 200 homeowners. They deserved to know the truth. I spent the next day writing a 2-page letter. Plain English, no legal jargon. Just facts. Page 1 was a series of bullet point truths. Fact: the HOA by county record consists solely of the 200 homes in Phase 1. Fact: the bylaws require an annual independent audit. The last audit on file was 6 years ago. Fact: state law mandates any contract over $50 be approved by a majority board vote in an open meeting. Fact: the HOA pays over $200,000 a year to a landscaping company owned by a board member's relative, without any homeowner vote. 12 facts in total, each one a matchstick. Page 2 had a map showing the official boundaries. Beneath it was a simple breakdown of the budget, including the massive payouts to Brenda's management company and her brother-in-law's landscaping business. No accusations. No conclusions. Just documents and numbers. At the bottom I wrote, a lawsuit has been filed by the HOA against a homeowner in the enclave. As part of that case, these documents have come to light. As members of the Crestwood Meadows HOA, you have a right to know how your money is being spent and how your association is being governed. I encourage you to ask the board for a full explanation. I printed 200 copies. That evening, Arthur walked with me through Crestwood Meadows as we placed a letter in every mailbox. It was like planting seeds in dry soil. Now we waited for the rain. The fallout came fast. It was a spark to dry timber. Arthur called the next morning, laughing. "Mark, you've done it now. There's a firestorm. People are outside talking to each other for the first time in years. The Facebook group has exploded. Everyone has your letter in hand." Brenda, unsurprisingly, lost her grip. She posted a furious all-caps message in the Facebook group. A malicious and disgruntled individual who is not even a member of our community is spreading lies and fake documents. This is slander. I am consulting our lawyer. She tried to discredit me. Claimed I was just mad about unpaid dues. But the residents weren't buying it. They had seen the numbers. The responses came fast. "Brenda, is it true that Pristine Lawns is owned by your brother-in-law? Please post the financial audits from the last 5 years as required. Why are we paying $60,000 a year to a management company you own?" Brenda tried deleting the comments. But every deletion triggered 5 more. Her control, once absolute, was crumbling in real time. In desperation, she called an emergency HOA meeting for 2 nights later at the community clubhouse. It was billed as a forum to address misinformation and reaffirm board integrity. It was supposed to be her show of strength. It became her downfall. That night, the clubhouse was packed. Beige cardigans and boiling rage. Arthur and I stood in the back watching. Brenda stood at the podium, flanked by Gary and the remaining board members, who looked like they wanted to vanish. She launched into a tirade about loyalty, community, and outsiders sowing division. She held up my letter. "These are lies," she screamed. "Calculated lies meant to destroy what we've built." A woman in the front row stood. Calm, clear voice. "Then show us the real documents, Brenda. Show us the audits. Show us the signed board minutes from when you approved that landscaping contract." Brenda fumbled. "Those are confidential board documents. We can't just." "Yes, you can," a man interrupted. "State law says we have the right to see them." The room erupted. Residents shouted questions about missing pool repairs, the $50,000 gala, the unexplained fines. Gary looked ready to flee. Brenda banged a gavel, demanding order, but it was far too late. The wall of fear and silence she'd spent years constructing had shattered. That's when Arthur stepped forward. A founding homeowner. A voice of quiet, unshakable authority. "Brenda," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "I was on the first board. We believed in transparency. We never approved contracts with family. We never hid financials. We never ran things like this. What have you done to our community? And what have you done with our money? Silence. Brenda stared, red-faced and speechless. Around her, the board members were pale with realization. The residents were furious. Mr. Snide, who had actually shown up, slipped out a side door without a word. He knew exactly what was coming. The court date was a week away. That's when I got the call. Snide, suddenly polite, suddenly meek. Mr. Mark, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. My client is prepared to withdraw the lawsuit with prejudice. Let's just make this go away. I let the silence stretch before I answered. No, Mr. Snide. You don't get to make this go away. Your client filed a frivolous lawsuit based on a forged document. You knew it. You enabled it. You ignored the truth. You broke the law. You're not withdrawing anything. We're going to court. I've filed for sanctions against both of you. I'm going to get my case dismissed. And you're going to pay for every second of my time. I'll see you Tuesday. Then I hung up. There would be no backroom deal. No quiet exit. Brenda built her power on perception, intimidation, and silence. Now I was taking all of it apart, piece by piece, in a courtroom with evidence, witnesses, and the rule of law. The 3-minute clock was about to start.